The harsh fluorescent lights of the auditorium blurred. I heard the announcer call the name of the graduate before me, but all I could hear was the ringing silence in the 2 empty chairs, reserved right beside me. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the cold plastic of the seat where my mother was supposed to be sitting. They were not just absent. They were absent because back home, my sister was having a meltdown over a misplaced pair of shoes. That single excruciating moment, watching dozens of other families erupt in cheers as their children walked across the stage, was the turning point. In that moment, watching the emptiness beside me amplify the hollowness in my chest, I knew my life would never be the same again. My name is Liam, and for 18 years I existed in the periphery of my own family. Our family wasn't defined by a shared sense of belonging, but by a gravitational pull centered entirely around my younger sister, Clara. Clara was the sun, a chaotic, brilliant, and demanding star around which our entire universe revolved. My parents didn't mean to neglect me. They were just constantly exhausted. Their resources, emotional, financial, and temporal, completely drained by the necessity of managing Clara's extreme emotional volatility. Clara was prone to tantrums that weren't just the usual childhood outbursts. They were nuclear meltdowns that could last for hours, sometimes days, paralyzing the household. The smallest trigger, a sudden change in plan, a meal she didn't like, or, as it turned out on my graduation day, a trivial loss could send her spiraling. I was, by necessity, the quiet one, the easy one, the one who excelled in school without needing help, the one who cooked his own dinners when Mum and Dad were locked in Clara's room trying to talk her down from a panic attack, the one who never had a major crisis because I understood that a crisis of mine would simply overload the system. I learned to derive satisfaction not from my parents' praise, which was rare and distracted, but from my own achievements. My acceptance into the prestigious state university on a full scholarship was the culmination of years of quiet, solitary effort. I remember telling my parents the news. Dad nodded, Mom offered a tired smile, and Clara immediately demanded attention by throwing her favorite toy across the room. The moment lasted perhaps 30 seconds. I didn't mind, not really. I told myself their love was just channeled differently. The graduation ceremony was supposed to be different. This wasn't just a high school diploma. It was the gateway to my future, a symbol of my hard-won independence. For the first time, I had explicitly requested their presence. It's important, I had told them a month prior, practicing the words in the mirror to ensure they sounded neutral, not needy. My mother had promised, pulling me into a hug that felt more like a quick pat. Of course, sweetie. We wouldn't miss it for the world. That promise, that small fragile commitment, was the main stake of the story. It wasn't about the diploma. It was about finally being seen, recognized, and validated for the person I had become despite the circumstances. I had staked my emotional well-being on their attendance, believing that this monumental achievement would finally be big enough to break the Clara-centric orbit. The build-up to the ceremony was fraught with the usual tension. Clara, now 15, had been particularly agitated all week. She hated being excluded, even from events she wouldn't attend. The morning of the graduation, I woke up early, feeling a nervous energy I hadn't expected. I was dressed in my cap and gown, ready to go, when the first small crack appeared. "Liam, honey," my mother's voice was strained, coming from behind Clara's locked bedroom door. "You go ahead. We'll meet you there." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. "Mom, it starts in an hour." "What's wrong?" "Clara can't find her necklace. The one from Aunt Carol. She's completely inconsolable. Your father and I are trying to look everywhere. But she won't calm down until she has it. We'll be 20 minutes behind, tops. We promise." A misplaced necklace. The scale of the problem did not match the magnitude of the sacrifice they were demanding. I stood in the hallway, the academic regalia suddenly feeling heavy, suffocating. I wanted to scream, to ask why a piece of costume, jewelry, was more important than the culmination of my entire secondary education. But the quiet boy in me knew the answer. It wasn't the necklace. It was Clara's piece and their piece that took precedence, always. I drove to the auditorium alone. I sat in the designated spot, watching the families filter in, their cameras ready, their faces beaming with pride. I kept checking my phone, the screen remaining dark. 20 minutes turned into 40. 40 turned into 60. The principal began his address. The commencement speaker delivered a powerful, moving speech about perseverance and the support of loved ones. Every word felt like a deliberate, cruel joke aimed directly at me. The escalating problem wasn't Clara's necklace. It was the slow, agonizing realization that they were not coming. I received a text message just as my Rouse stood up to approach the stage. It was from Dad. "So sorry, Liam. Clara is still hysterical. We couldn't leave her. We'll celebrate tonight. We're so proud of you, X." The final nail. The apology was a polite dismissal. an afterthought tacked onto the end of a decision that had already been made. The text message wasn't the climax. It was the final trigger for the climax and turning point. My name was called Liam Miller, magna cum laude. I walked across that stage, the applause for me sounding thin and distant, the weight of the moment crashing down. I smiled, shook hands, accepted the scroll, the physical evidence of my achievement. But when I looked out into the sea of proud faces, the empty chairs were all I saw. The emotion that hit me wasn't sadness or anger. It was an ice-cold, pristine clarity. It was the sudden, undeniable understanding that I had been waiting for, something that would never come. Their love was conditional, bound by the constant demands of another person. My existence at home was merely a utility, the child who required no attention, so that all attention could be diverted elsewhere. That moment, the split-second decision on the stage, was simple but monumental. I would stop waiting. I didn't go back to the car. I didn't go to the reception. As soon as the ceremony ended, I slipped out a side door still wearing the gown. I drove straight to the bank. I had saved nearly $20,000 over the years from my part-time job, money I was saving for graduate school, money that my parents didn't even know I had. I withdrew everything. Then I drove to my room, which was on the ground floor, and began packing. The house was chaotic. I could hear Clara screaming faintly from upstairs, the sound muffled but persistent. My parents' voices were low, stressed, trying to reason with her. They were in the thick of it, and I was finally free to move without being noticed. I packed only what was mine: clothes, books, my laptop, my documents. I left everything that had been gifted to me by my parents, the old furniture, the sentimental trinkets, a subtle but deliberate message of severance. I taped a note to my bedroom door, placed it where they would see it after the ordeal was over. The note was short. I got my diploma, saw the empty seats. I'm moving into my dorm early. Don't worry about me. I don't require fixing. I'll call when I'm settled. I loaded the small U-Haul trailer I had rented 2 days prior, just in case. The entire process took less than an hour. I drove away from that house not looking back. The silence in the car was profound. It wasn't just the absence of noise. It was the absence of the constant, underlying hum of anxiety that had defined my home life. The immediate consequence of my decision was the immediate, blissful quiet of my new life. I checked into my campus dorm that afternoon, 3 weeks before the official move-in date, using my scholarship documentation to secure early access. I furnished my small room with used items, set up my computer, and began building a life for myself, focused entirely on my own needs and goals. 3 days passed. 3 days of silence from my family. I knew they would find the note. I knew the initial relief that the easy child was no longer present would quickly be replaced by something else. On the 4th day, the calls started. They weren't worried. They were furious. My mother called first. Her voice, usually soft and apologetic, was sharp with shock and a poorly disguised sense of betrayal. "Liam, how could you? Why didn't you talk to us? Do you know what kind of stress this is putting?" On Clara, she's distraught. The familiar pattern, my actions were only judged by their effect on Clara. I took a deep breath. "You missed my graduation, Mom. Not for an emergency? For a tantrum over a necklace. You promised. It was an emergency for us. We were dealing with a crisis. You're so selfish, Liam. We sacrificed everything for you both. No, Mom, you sacrificed me for Clara. The check is cashed. The tuition is paid. I am independent. My crisis is over." I hung up. My father called later, attempting to use the man of the house authority. "This is not how you treat your family. You need to come home and apologize to your sister." "I am where I belong, Dad, and I will not apologize for being disappointed. I am not the fixer anymore." The reactions from the antagonists were exactly what I had expected: denial and projection. They couldn't understand that I wasn't running away from them. I was running towards myself. My friends, however, reacted with surprised relief. They had always known the bizarre dynamics of my family, and they celebrated my freedom with genuine warmth. My best friend Omar brought me a pizza and a new houseplant. "Welcome to the real world, Liam. It's about time you put yourself first." The relationship with my parents transitioned from distant neglect to weaponized communication. They tried to use guilt, but I was immunized against it. They attempted to control my finances, only to discover I was financially independent. They eventually tried to use Clara, sending tearful texts about how much she missed me. I sent back a polite text to Clara, offering to meet her for coffee off campus, deliberately excluding my parents. She never replied. The final resolution of the conflict wasn't a tearful reunion. It was a slow, painful acceptance of silence. Years passed. I thrived in college. Without the constant drain of familial drama, I flourished academically and socially. I became the outgoing person I always suspected I could be. I started dating someone incredible, someone who saw my achievements as the product of great resilience, not just good luck. I learned what unconditional love truly looked like. And it had nothing to do with tolerance for poor behavior. The long-term effect of that split-second decision on my graduation stage was a profound shift in my identity. The quiet, self-sacrificing boy was gone. The man who replaced him understood that self-respect is not given. It is earned by setting firm, unyielding boundaries. I learned that you cannot pour from an empty cup, and that your mental and emotional peace is not a luxury. It is the foundation of a good life. I eventually learned that the greatest lesson of my life was the one I learned while staring at those 2 empty chairs. Your worth is not measured by the attention you receive, but by the respect you give yourself. I never completely cut ties. I maintained polite, but I never went back to live in that house. And I never let the gravitational pull of my sister's drama drag me down again. I built my own universe, and this time Liam was the sun. If there is one thing I want you to take away from my story, it is this. Waiting for someone to finally see your worth is the longest, most exhausting wait in the world. Sometimes the most powerful act of self-love is simply to walk away from the table, where you are consistently undervalued. Even if that table is your own family, the door is heavy, the walk is scary, but the life you build on the other side, built with your own 2 hands, is a masterpiece of independence. The silence may be deafening at first, but soon you realize it's the beautiful, peaceful sound of your own life beginning. The silence may have been the sound of my life beginning, but new beginnings are rarely smooth. My initial euphoria of independence quickly gave way to the sharp, practical demands of self-sufficiency. I was living in a small, sterile dorm room. The scholarship covered tuition, but everything else, food, bills, supplies, was now solely on my shoulders. I was used to working, but balancing a rigorous engineering course load with 2 demanding part-time jobs was a different kind of exhaustion. It was a physical, manageable fatigue, though. Unlike the emotional exhaustion of living at home, this fatigue felt earned. My parents didn't give up their attempts at control immediately. They escalated their tactics. My mother started sending long, tearful emails not asking how I was, but detailing how much my absence was impacting. Clara, the emails were always structured the same way, an opening of feigned maternal concern, followed by paragraphs lamenting Clara's inability to cope without my quiet presence, suggesting that my absence was a malicious attack on my vulnerable sister. They framed my independence as a moral failing. I learned the invaluable lesson of the grey rock method. I never engaged with the guilt or the drama. My replies were brief, impersonal, and factual. Mom's email. Clara had a panic attack when she saw your empty room. She misses her brother so much. Please, Liam, just come home for a weekend. You need to fix this. My reply. I am focused on my studies. I received an A on my thermodynamics midterm. I am unavailable this weekend. This refusal to be pulled into their emotional vortex was my true revenge. Their power over me had always relied on my willingness to absorb their stress. By becoming boring and non-reactive, I cut off their supply. The communication tapered off not because they stopped caring, but because I stopped reacting in a way that fed their need for drama. My relationship with Clara was the trickiest part. She wasn't just the antagonist. She was also a victim of the dynamic my parents created. About 3 months into the semester, I finally agreed to meet her for lunch at a neutral cafe near campus. She arrived late, looking subdued, but still carrying the familiar air of fragile expectation. You really moved out, she stated, looking around the busy cafe, clearly uncomfortable being out of the house bubble. It's different at home now. Everything is louder. I nodded. I'm sorry it's hard for you, Clara, but I needed this space. She didn't apologize for the graduation. She couldn't. She was incapable of seeing past her own needs. Instead, she asked, do you hate me? Mom says you hate us all. I don't hate you, Clara, I told her honestly. But I don't love the way we lived. I was a quiet observer for too long. I observed that my peace was always sacrificed for your comfort, and that's not sustainable for me. The conversation was civil, but deeply clarifying. She was trapped in the system my parents built, and I was simply no longer willing to be the wall that held it up. That day, I learned that true healing means accepting that some relationships, no matter how much you value the person, must exist at a safe distance. I loved my sister, but I could no longer be her emotional crutch. We agreed to exchange occasional texts, keeping the boundary firm and the topic superficial. The second year of college brought a massive opportunity and the biggest test of my newfound independence. My university offered a coveted, paid summer internship across the country with a major tech firm. It was a career-defining chance. I immediately accepted. I called my parents to let them know I wouldn't be returning home for the summer. My father, who had been relatively silent, suddenly found his voice.
Absolutely not, Liam. You need to save that money.
You need to come home, help around the house, and focus on next semester. You're being reckless. It was a final attempt to invoke parental authority where it no longer existed. I didn't argue. I didn't seek permission. I merely stated the fact. Dad, I am 19, financially self-sufficient, and I have accepted a full-time, paid internship that is critical to my degree. I informed you as a courtesy, not to request approval. My flight is booked for June 1st. I will call you from California. Hanging up that phone call was the final piece of the resolution puzzle. It was the moment I realized they had officially transitioned from being my legal guardians to being merely people I once lived with. The lack of guilt I felt afterward was liberating. It was proof that the old, accommodating Liam was truly gone. The summer in California was transformative. I was surrounded by high-achieving, independent peers who saw me as I was, smart, driven, and capable. They were impressed by my hustle, not burdened by my baggage. I met mentors who poured into me, teaching me that self-care is not selfishness, but a requirement for productivity. I started seeing my old life not as a tragedy, but as a forge. It had made me resilient, resourceful, and fiercely determined. Ambition, that internal fire, the desire to prove that I was valuable even when my family didn't show it, became the engine of my success. When I returned from my junior year, I was a different person entirely. My apartment, secured with the money I earned, was a sanctuary. I had established my life. My parents, surprisingly, sought a reunion. They invited me to Christmas dinner that year. I accepted, but on my terms, 1 hour, no discussion of the past, and a hard departure time. The dinner was awkward, stiff, and punctuated by long silences. Clara was subdued, quieter than I remembered. My parents, attempting to be warm, were clearly uncomfortable with the professional, guarded, and polite stranger sitting at the table. They tried to praise my success, but the words felt hollow. They were praising the success they had zero contribution in building. As I stood up to leave exactly on time, my mother pulled me aside. Her eyes were red not from anger, but from a true, deep sadness. "Liam," she whispered, "we were wrong. We should have been there. We failed you." That was the only apology I ever received. It was years too late to change anything, but it was honest. I looked at her, and the intense, burning anger I had carried for years simply evaporated. It was replaced by pity and a sense of detached understanding. "I know, Mom," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "And I forgive you. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean moving back. I wish you both peace, but I found mine elsewhere." I hugged them both briefly, a final, necessary courtesy, and walked out the door for the last time as their child under obligation. The profound lesson I carried away from that whole experience is this: you cannot rely on external validation to define your internal worth. My diploma was just paper. The empty chairs were just seats. But the moment I chose to act based on my own sense of justice and respect, I validated myself. The greatest gift they ever gave me was that moment of neglect at my graduation, because it forced me to sever the cord and rely entirely on myself. It taught me the sheer, unbelievable power of boundaries that protect your past self from your future self. My life is now full, rich, and built on solid ground. The quiet boy who used to wait in the hallway is now a confident professional, surrounded by people who celebrate his wins without demanding his emotional labor. The empty seats at my graduation were a gift. They were a signpost pointing me toward the only person who truly needed my attention, my loyalty, and my unconditional love, myself. If you are listening to this, and you are waiting for a sign, for an apology, or for a moment big enough to finally be seen by the people who matter, stop waiting. Stop begging for a seat at a table where you have to prove your worth every day. Get up, quietly move out, and build your own table. When you finally sit down at the table you built, the silence won't be deafening. It will be the sound of belonging, and that feeling, that deep, self-made peace is the only closure you will ever need.